Welcome to the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview modern-day explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, get out of their comfort zones, and accomplish ambitious pursuits. This is episode 149 with Alienor Le Gouvello. I learned about Alienor a while ago through Hannah Engelkamp's Facebook page. Now, if you remember Hannah Engelkamp, I interviewed her in episode 45 about her 1,000-mile donkey adventure around Wales with her donkey named Chico. So when I saw this Facebook post about Alienor and her long horseback ride in Australia, I knew I had to one day get her on the show. But before we get to that, if you want to give me some feedback about the show, you can reach me at paul@thepursuitzone.com. And you can also leave me a voice message through SpeakPipe if you go to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. The Bicentennial National Trail stretches over 5,000 kilometers and crosses some of eastern Australia's most remote and spectacular landscapes. It took 13 months for Alienor Le Gouvello and her 3 horses, Roxanne, River, and Cooper, to complete the trail, making her the first person to finish it on wild horses. Before setting out, she had to break and train these wild horses, known as brumbies, with the help of the Guy Fawkes Heritage Horse Association. Alienor also traveled to Mongolia to compete in the 6-day, 480-kilometer Gobi Desert Cup endurance race on Mongolian horses, where she finished in first place. You can learn more about Alienor and her adventures on Facebook at Wild at Heart Australia. Alienor Le Gouvello, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks for having me.
Alienor, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Paris, but we also grew up on a countryside house outside of Paris where I did a lot of riding. And my origins are from Brittany, so French originally.
So you've been with riding horses since a young age?
Yes, I have actually. Since I'm 5, they're a big passion of mine. I've always been tried to be around horses as much as I can.
What got you started in adventure travel?
It's a funny thing to define because I just think life is one big adventure. So I've just done lots of fun adventures like that throughout my life. I lived in India when I was 18 on my own in New Delhi. I've done another trek across Siberia and Eastern Europe on a motorcycle with my ex when I was 22. I've done another trek in Mongolia of 900 kilometers. Lived in Brazil for a couple of years. I just love traveling and adventuring, and I do a lot of it.
What drew you to Australia?
Well, I was 20 when I came to Australia for a 3-week holiday and never took my flight back. I just absolutely loved it and had a great feeling about the people, the place, and I ended up in Central Australia to follow my ex at the time, and I fell in love with that sense of space that you have out here in Australia. When you're European, is quite unique. Driving through Central Australia and having these big, vast, open landscapes is what I fell in love with, is the outback out here.
Before you started on this big Bicentennial National Trail adventure, what were you doing? What were you doing to earn a living?
I'm a caseworker, youth worker with Aboriginal kids on remote Aboriginal communities in Central Australia. So I live full-time on remote communities and provide support to the kids on the communities. So there's a lot of issues, sadly, around domestic violence stuff, substance abuse. So I work with the social services on referring and reporting kids at risk, and because I'm the only person out there, the services don't usually make it to those places. I'm the first contact. So I've had more than 10 years experience working on and off and living full-time on Aboriginal communities, and it's been an amazing experience. And a great insight into a really interesting culture, but also got to travel extensively through a really remote part of the world. So it's been quite an amazing experience.
So what do we need to know about the Bicentennial National Trail?
Well, the National Trail is quite unique because, well, it's one of the longest walking trail in the world. It's 5,330 kilometers. It goes through 18 national parks, 53 state forests, I believe, and many other hundreds of kilometers of all sorts. But the diversity of landscape is what really gets me for this trek. It's you go through 3 states and I started from south, but you go through mountainous regions, farmland and plains, tropical forest up north, and it follows this mountain range called the Great Dividing Range. So the diversity of landscape, environment, flora and fauna is just absolutely amazing. So it's a really unique thing in that sense.
In terms of wildlife, what do you see?
In terms of wildlife, well, what amazes me the most in Australia is the bird life. The bird life is absolutely fascinating. They've got so many different species of parrots, so really colourful parrots, really noisy birds as well. So when you're sleeping in the bush every night, the morning orchestra of birds is something really special. But then you also have, so there's dingoes up north, a bit more scary, the most scary crocodiles. There's a lot of snakes. There's a lot of not very friendly things in Australia. And then you have emus and other big birds, bush turkeys. Those things are pretty cool. What else? Yeah. And then you've got cattle. I went through a lot of cattle properties.
What about camels?
Not on the eastern side of Australia, no. But where I work in Central Australia, I see a lot of them, yes.
So how did you get the idea for this expedition?
Actually, it was a friend of mine who mentioned the National Trail to me, and it kind of planted a seed in my head. And initially I was going to do maybe sections of it. And then, it grew in my head and I just couldn't get rid of it. And I decided I wanted to do the whole thing and do it on wild horses.
When your friend suggested this, why did they suggest it? Were you talking about that you wanted to do a long hike, or were you talking about wanting to do something with horses?
Yeah, we wanted to do something with horses. We both have a love for horses. And she mentioned doing sections of it on horseback. And I straight away loved the idea and decided I wanted to do it on wild horses and do the entire trail to dedicate the ride to promoting the image of the wild horses in Australia, which is usually very negative.
Why is it negative?
Well, because Australia has the largest population of wild horses in the world. There's over 1 million, but they're not managed. So in places like in national parks and proximity of people, when they are in too large numbers, seen as a pest, they're seen as a pest anyway. They're a feral animal. They're not a native animal to Australia. Therefore, the government sometimes culls them with really cruel methods such as aerial culling. So the Guy Fawkes River National Park, where my horses come from, started this great initiative with the rangers from the national park to trap the horses and rehome the ones that were worth rehoming and send to the abattoirs the ones that are in too poor condition or untrainable, which at least is a humane manner of dealing and managing their numbers. So this is what I want to promote. I wanted to promote through my ride is responsible and humane management of the wild horses in Australia. But the horses here have just done so well. They've adapted to all sorts of terrain and environment. They do extremely well in the desert in Central Australia. That's when I first came across them on Aboriginal communities. There's some on islands, there's some on mountains, others in plains. They've just adapted all to their merit to all sorts of environment here, and there's too many of them, so they do need to be managed. The numbers do need to be managed, but I just wanted to promote responsible and humane management of them.
Tell me a little bit about the horses that you chose.
They're heritage horses because horses are not native to Australia. They came with the pioneers, and they were also bred for during the Second World War for the war. So the Guy Fawkes horses have been DNA tested and they've been recognised as a heritage breed because they're as close as it comes as a breed that we call the Whaler, which is the war horses. And that breed is just extremely tough. They were bred to go to the war. So they're very sturdy, they're very good on their feet, extremely resilient. And my horses have handled the 5,330 kilometers extremely well. In 13 months on the road, I never had an injury. They never got hurt or anything dramatic, which usually with any horses, domesticated horse, 13 months on the road, you can be assured there's going to be something, But these guys just handled it amazingly, and I'm so proud of them. And that's what I wanted to show to people, that they're really worthwhile looking after.
Why did you choose these particular 3 horses?
Well, the Guidebooks Association, when I came across them, were extremely supportive of my project, and the founders, their names are Erica and Graham. I was out working in Central Australia saving for the expedition, and she was on the lookout of horses being trapped in the national park for the right ones, the right age, the right temperament to do the trail with. And when we thought we had the 3, then I spent 6 months living on their farm to train them, so break them in. I don't really like those terms, but to train them to the saddle, pack saddle, and pretty much expose them to as much as you can for a trip like this. So we had chosen 3, and 2 during training didn't work out because you don't really know what you're going to get with a wild horse. So one was extremely dominant and the other one extremely wild, and I was running out of time. So I got a younger one, which are easier to train, and I bought my mare, already educated, who's also a Brumby from the same national park. So I have Cooper, the buckskin, who's one of the only ones I chose from the very start and went through with the whole training myself. River, who's the Palomino, he was only 2.5 when he got removed from the park and I started training him. And then my mare, Roxanne. So that's my team.
Roxanne is the mare, and that's the one that you ride on?
No, so I ride all 3. So the idea of having 3 horses for a trip like this is that you have a rotation system. So you ride one, have a pack horse, and have a spare horse, and every day you rotate, and every day a horse gets a rest. Because if you work your horses every day, you're very likely to have rubs on their back. So the rotation system is what kept them in good condition.
How do you feed the horses? I mean, when you get into camp every night, what process do you have to go through, and how do the horses get fed and taken care of that way?
Well, it's only one of the most stressful parts of doing a trip like this is I am responsible for 3 beautiful creatures, and I have to find water and feed for them every day in the bush. They, being Brumbies, are extremely resilient, and they can do it tough for a few days. So at times there wasn't much feed around. So basically they were grazing what grass there was around, and I would hobble them at night. Hobbling a horse is putting leather straps to attach the 2 front legs together so that they're slowed down. They can't just take off galloping across the flat. So I would hobble them, have cowbells on them, and they'd graze free until dark. And then at dark, I put them behind electric tape that I'd put between trees. So every day when I was traveling, I had an approximate idea with the guidebook of where I wanted to camp. I would inform myself with the locals to make sure there was water where I was heading. So usually I'd study my map a month ahead of myself. And then, coming to the end of the day, I'd be looking for a good spot with water and good grass for the horses. But then when I'd get to a small town every now and then where we would resupply, I would take 2 or 3 days off and pour the feed into the horses. So I'd buy them processed feed, and I'd pour a 20-kilo bag in 2 days into them. And Brumbies have the ability of putting weight on really fast because in the wild their nutrition is pretty poor. So if you feed them well, they put on weight really easily. So they're good doers, we say in the horse world.
So tell me a little bit more about these maps, or these, maybe that's not the right term, but the books that you keep referring to on your Facebook page, book number 1, 2, 3, and so on. Where do you find those, and how do they help you?
Okay, so the National Trail is separated in 12 sections, and each section has a guidebook, but there's no actual map of the entire trail. There's those guidebooks, which are mud maps that were done 30 years ago, and they are very tricky to navigate with, especially when you're doing south to north, which is backwards. The books are written north to south. But I had to leave from south to north because you travel with the seasons and you can only do the high Victorian country, the mountains, in the summer. And because I had double the time of training the horses, I had to leave from south. So I had to read my maps backwards, which was quite tricky because the instructions in them are really quite full on sometimes. It'll be like, after this mango tree, head 180 degree east for 2 kilometers. At the corner of that fence, go towards that tree line or whatever. Like, it's just extremely hard. And in 30 years, the country's changed a lot. So there's a lot of things that are out of date. So you develop a pretty strong sense of direction and common sense of working out the country and those little books. And then I had maps on my phone as well, which were satellite hooked up. So not a GPS, but I could see where I was on those maps. And then it was a matter of reading the country and making sense of those little mud maps in the guidebooks, which wasn't always easy.
And you can buy these online?
Yes, you can on the Bicentennial National Trail website.
So how well is the trail marked?
It depends of the sections. Pretty much through the Queensland section, you'll be lucky if you see a marker every month. And then some sections, in national parks, they can be quite well marked. But it just depends. And most of the time, they're not well marked. It's remote. The markers are only small, and they might be in places where they're full, or the weather, whatever. They just get lost, or there's none, or nobody's put any out there. So it's about really reading your maps and being able to navigate through the bush on your own.
How often did you find yourself losing the trail, or how often did you have to clear brush and debris off the trail?
There's a lot of bush bashing sections, I call them, where you're actually going through the bush where you're not on a track or anything. And these are fun because you're navigating through the bush on your own. You're going through really overgrown bushy country, and you're making your way through the jungle. It feels pretty cool. But I never got lost as such because I had the satellite hooked up thing on my phone. I could see where I was. But I got off track a fair bit. So because the trail is not marked, because it's very overgrown some places, because it's quite remote, sometimes you lose your track. So I don't get lost, but you go off track. And that's very, very frustrating when you're on horseback because you travel 5 to 7 k's an hour. You can only walk with a pack horse because it's dead weight on their back, so it works against them. So if you go faster than a walk, you're guaranteed you'll put holes on its back. So if you do 5 k's the wrong way, that's 2 hours detour. It's an absolute nightmare. And it's happened 13 months on the road. I'm trying to think back. I don't know, maybe 5 times or so. Not all that many times. I'm proud to say I've navigated pretty well. A couple of times I got completely off track, and in those moments there's no point panicking. You just have to find water and feed for the horses. And I was lucky. Again, it's about reading the country, and you see there's an escarpment, so you're going to try and find a gully somewhere where there's going to be water, and hoping there's water in there. So the couple of times I got completely off track and I had run out of daylight to backtrack, I managed to find water and backtrack the next day.
Is there mobile phone coverage where you are at, or is it too remote? How are you able to communicate?
It depended. Sometimes I had service, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I didn't have service for 3 weeks. Sometimes I had service almost every day. It just, it's 5,000 k's along the East Coast. So it just depended on where I was.
Did you bring a satellite phone or any type of emergency beacon device?
Yes, I had a satellite phone for the first 3 months. For the first 3 months on an expedition like this, you have a lot of gear and you ditch a lot of things that you think were absolutely necessary, but they're not. So after 3 months, my satellite phone was something that I ditched because I found I didn't use it as much. And I had already something called a spot tracker, which was at my belt 24/7. And a spot tracker is a device that's satellite hooked up as well, and has 3 buttons on it. One that says I'm safe and I've reached my destination for the day and sends my coordinates to contact like my expedition manager and my family. So they always knew where I was and they knew I was safe every day. And then it has a couple of other buttons, one that says I need help in the next couple of days, and one that says I'm dying, send me a chopper. So I had always that at my belt. So if anything happened, I could reach out.
So you ditched the satellite phone after 3 months. What else did you find that you did not need?
Lots of things I can't remember now, but horse gear stuff, cooking stuff, sleeping stuff. I ended up just sleeping on a sheepskin. It was enough. So I had a mat that I got rid of, things like that, sleeping gear, cooking gear, horse gear that I thought were an absolute necessary, but you learn to make without. And pretty much the rule is every item has to have more than one purpose. So you just, you end up with not much gear, which is the ideal.
What are you doing every night for food? What do you cook?
The food gets very boring on the trail. So it's a year-long expedition and I have to be self-sufficient for up to 3 weeks, a month sometimes in the bush. So I could only carry dry food, but I couldn't afford the fancy, dehydrated, nice nutrition food stuff for a year. So I just ate 2-minute noodles, rice, pasta, noodle stuff. And then my protein was sardine and tuna tins, and I'd have porridge and coffee in the morning. And then I just had supplements to make up for my green and vitamins that I was missing out on a lot. So it was really not exciting food-wise.
What section of the trail did you find to be the most challenging?
The Victorian section. So it's the beginning of your trek. There's a lot of teething problems on the start of an expedition. And the south section is the toughest. It's the steepest, most mountainous, remote, hard section. So a section you're on top of mountain ridges, there's no water. The country is extremely steep and hard to travel through. So definitely the south, the high Victorian country, and it was the start of the trip. So the horses were struggling with it. We weren't quite a team at the very beginning, and it was extremely hard.
Do you have any idea how many people take on the challenge of trying to hike this trail every year?
I wouldn't know now. To doing the entire trail, very few have. Since in its inception in the 70s, I think only about 30 odd people have done the entire trail, some in groups, some with backup, some with other means than horses. But very few have done it solo and with the same horses from start to finish, and none have done it with wild horses before. And I think it's becoming a bit more popular, especially since I've shared my trek a lot through social media. And there's a few other recent trekkers who have done it, who have shared quite widely as well with social media through books, etc. So it's getting more popular, but it's still not something that many people do in its entire length.
What was your favorite section of the trail?
It was the toughest one. It was really challenging. It was the high Victorian country. The mountain views, when you get to the top of those mountains, are amazing. The little wooden huts, the refuges for the winter, they were amazing to stay in. And yeah, I liked the challenge. It was really hard in Queensland when you go for days of straight, long, flat roads. That's just an even bigger challenge on the mind. I enjoyed the physical challenge through the high Victorian section, and the landscape was mad. It was beautiful.
Would you ever consider doing it again?
No. No way. No, you don't do something like that again. That just wouldn't make sense at all. And it's so hard. It's such a long trip. I got very sick towards the end and I just was so over it. So no, never again. It was an amazing experience, but it just wouldn't make sense to do it twice.
Well, let's say that you hadn't done it before. Would you consider walking it versus on horseback?
No. I like hiking, but on a journey like this, I like sharing it with, already being on your own is tough, but if you're on your own with no animals on top of that, it's got not much fun for me. I like sharing my experiences either with, a partner or with my animals. And I didn't mind being on my own at all as long as I had my animals. They're my family. My horses are like my family now.
So along the way, you were meeting different people and they were helping you. Tell me about some of these people and how they were helping you.
Well, people were wonderful all the way through, but country folks in Australia are extremely welcoming and have that really nice attitude of, we help each other out in the bush type thing. But I never asked for help. I was self-sufficient, but at the most, sometime I might ask for food for my horses, which was my biggest priority. But people, I think, wanted to be part of the adventure and helped in a way so that, they could get involved a little bit. And I was really blessed and touched by so many of those lovely people I met along the way who gave us a hand. And at times when it was quite tough as well, there was these people that we call the trail angels, the people who have done the trail, that in times where you need a bit of a hand, just pop up these people that are extremely helpful and really lovely. I've had a few of those trail angels.
Does the trail cut through private property, like farms, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's part of your logistics is you ring up. So I'd study months ahead of myself, my navigation and maps usually, and you'd ring up the properties who you're going to go through and let them know an estimate time of when you were going to travel through. It's as a courtesy call, really. It's important. So we keep people happy to have the trackers on their property.
At one point, you had to stop to take a 5-month break. What were you doing during that time, and did that break, was it helpful to you?
I'd just done 4,000 kilometers in 10 months. It was pretty, it's a long trek. And I had run out of cash, and my horses were just starting to be a little bit sore on their back. So I was concerned about that, but I also had run out of cash. So it was getting extremely hot, and we were traveling into the north, into the hotter country again in summer, which is the wet season up here, where they have cyclones and tropical storms every afternoon. So it was heartbreaking at the time because I really intended to do the whole trail in one go, but I decided to pull up and give my horses a break, get some cash again, let the wet season pass and come back 5 months later. So I went back to work in Central Australia for 5 months on Aboriginal community, and then returned after the summer where it was safer to travel. And it was lucky I did because there was a really intense cyclone that went through called Cyclone Debbie that devastated over 1,000 kilometres of coast and went as far as the National Trail inland. So I would have been a lot in trouble if I hadn't pulled up. So it helped financially stopping, and it gave my horses a break and gave me a bit of a break, I suppose, as well. And then we returned fresh after the summer, ready to go again.
So you ran out of money. What do you recommend people need to budget for a 13-month trek like this?
Well, it was more than 13 months for me, really, because I also spent 9 months training the horses before I left. So during that time, I couldn't really work much. I was working on a farm next door to where I was living at 4 o'clock in the morning to do a tiny bit of cash and spend my savings. But it was almost, it's 3 years of my life where I didn't work much. I put all my savings towards this trip. So, and, as far as much as you can plan, there's so many things that, you're not going to budget for. So I had just run out of cash, and I had saved 20 grand, and I had 2 credit cards as well. And when I had run out of cash and I was starting to live off my credit cards, so I was like, I'll just, there's no way I'm stopping now. I'll keep on going. So Yeah, I think I spent about 40 grand. So I'm still paying off my credit cards at the moment. So yeah, but once when you're on it, when you on such a big expedition like this, and it takes so much planning, preparing, yeah, I just didn't want to stop because of money. So now I've got it. So I've got some debts to pay off.
Wow, that's a lot of money. That's Australian dollars?
Yeah, but Australia is not cheap, and horses are not cheap, and the gear, anything to do with horses, is not cheap.
Wow, that's a lot. If you asked me to guess, I probably would have said like 5,000.
Oh, wow.
That's just
Well, you can, I mean, it totally depends, everyone can travel their way differently, whatever, I had to use a truck to truck my horses from New South Wales to Victoria, then back from Queensland to New South Wales, and then from Queensland back to bottom of New South Wales. All those things are expensive. Vets, horse shoeing, horse food. I mean, of course you can do it cheaper, and probably 20 grand would have done it if I had been on the trail the whole time. But horses are expensive, and I was gonna train 3 wild horses, which don't cost much. But then I had to buy my mare, who cost me 4 grand. Just things like that you don't plan for. So, but I think you can do it with a much smaller budget. It just it's just what I ended up with.
how often do you have to change the shoes on the horses?
When you're doing up to 40 kilometers a day, you need to change them very regularly. So I would organise to have a farrier come and meet me in the bush every 5 or 6 weeks, at the very most 6. But my horses actually did 3,000 kilometers barefoot at the start, and they handled it really well. And I would put boots on the tough terrain, like the rocky terrain, but I just got sick of dealing with the boots, and their feet were a bit tender, so I ended up putting shoes. But obviously it's, the logistics of organising a ferry to come and find me in the bush, I was a bit worried about, but it worked out. So it was about 5 weeks.
What about the adventure are you most proud of?
The way my horses handled it, and finished in extremely good condition. There's people who do the trail who, will spend 2 months on a horse and then, thrash it and then get another horse. And I really pride myself in the fact that I started and finished the trail with the same horses in really good condition. And I really owe it to these horses, who are extremely tough and resilient and amazing, the Guy Fawkes horses.
Will there be a book or a movie about this adventure?
Yes, so I'm in the process of writing a book with a French publisher at the moment. It will be translated into English, obviously. So that's a written book, but I've also got the intention to do a photography book, because I had an amazing photographer, a professional expedition photographer, who joined me on foot for 5 weeks and took some really beautiful pictures. She became an amazing friend as well. Her name is Kat Vinton. So we intend to do a photography book together. There's a written book, and I have a fair bit of footage, but I'm not too sure if it's worth anything at this stage. I'll look into it once I've finished doing the book and I've got a bit of money in front of me again.
Where are the horses now?
The horses now are at my partner's family property on a really big paddock, running with other horses being on holiday. And I'm about to bring them back into work in a couple of weeks' time, and bring them to where I am in Queensland and start doing farm work with them, so cattle work and things like that with them. But I'll never part with them, and they'll always be together. So there's 3 of them, and they really like being together, and I will never sell them or anything like that. They're my family.
So after the adventure ended on the Bicentennial National Trail, you ended up going to Mongolia to do this Gobi Desert Cup race. How did that come about?
So that was quite crazy. I hadn't even finished the national trail. I think I was 2 or 3 days away from finishing it, and I was close to little country towns up north, so I had phone service. And this woman, who's also French Australian, who is the director and organizer of this race, contacted me. And because it was the inauguration of the race in the first year they were doing it, offered to sponsor me to do a little promotion of the race and participate. So I hadn't finished the trail, and so many times along the trail, people ask me, "So what next? What are you doing when you finish?" And I never knew what to say, because it was 3 years of my life coming to an end, and it had taken so much of my energy and my life, and my life revolved around it for 3 years. I hadn't really sought further it. So when she approached me saying, "You want to come to Mongolia for another little adventure?" I thought, perfect, sure, why not? I don't know what else I'm doing at this stage. And that was crazy, because I hadn't even finished the trail, and I said yes. And then I had just under a month to renew my passport, get a visa, train for this really physical ride, and go to Mongolia. So it was pretty hectic and a little bit intimidating, because I'd never done endurance racing before, and they were mostly professional riders, the other participants. But I thought, it sounds fun, why not? I'll go for it.
How many participants were there?
So it was the first year, and they had 16. It's a team endurance race, so there's 4 people per team. We had a New Zealand team, an American team, and 2 Australian teams. And then, you also have your individual times as well.
So you had 3 other people on your team?
Yes, so I had, which was amazing, Belinda Ritchie, who's the only other woman to have done the entire National Trail solo as well. So the 2 of us were in a team with 2 friends. So it was really cool.
So how does that work? Do you guys ride?
So we all race every day, and it's the times that we do, all individual times and placements that we do every day, that make up the count for a team, but also individually. You get a horse per day to ride 80 kilometers, and you have to go through vet points every 40 kilometers to check the horse is sound to go the other 40 kilometers. And you have 6 days of 80 kilometers a day through the Gobi Desert, which is really hot and dry. And you have to go through the vet checks, and if you don't make a placement for the day. So I placed every day within the first 6 participants, and I vetted every single day. So I looked after my horses really well, and I was lucky. I drew some good horses, and I looked after them.
Do you get any say at all in the horse selection?
No, not at all. Except some horses are half trained, or a lot of them are not very trained. So if some horses, when the local herders get on them and they're pretty wild, like bucking and jumping and throwing themselves on the ground, some participants wouldn't want them. But there was another young rider from New Zealand and myself who were pretty keen. Well, you'd know when a horse had so much attitude that he had also the stamina to make it through the day. So we'd pick whoever didn't want the wild horses. We were allowed to say, "I'll take that one." And they usually had the stamina in them because they were pretty wild.
So what is the landscape like that you're going through in this race?
Well, it's the Gobi Desert, but at the start of it, it's, I guess, big open plains and gentle rolling hills. And then you go through rocky patches, and then absolutely dead, flat, nothing, far as you can see, crazy, flat desert looking.
So what is the ground like? Is it soft sand or is it hard packed dirt?
Both. So some sections are really heavy, deep sand. Others are really rocky, which make the day really different for the horses. Those horses are barefoot as well. So if you're on a really rocky country, they're going to struggle trotting and countering on it. So, it's going to be a tough day. In the heavy sand, again, it's hard work for them. On the days that the dirt was not too heavy or not too rocky, then we'd travel good. But it changed a fair bit.
What equipment do you have to bring with you, or is everything provided for you?
You have to bring your own safety gear, so your helmet and riding gear. But if you can be provided your riding gear, so they provide endurance race saddles and the Mongolian bridles. But if you want to ride in your saddle, you can bring your own as well. But obviously traveling overseas with a saddle is a bit of a bit difficult. So I used the gear they had, and I was quite happy with it.
What's it like when you are done for the day? Do they provide accommodation for you and food?
We camped every night. So they built a camp in the middle of nowhere, and the local herders and the staff were absolutely amazing. It was extremely well organized. They would erect this camp in the middle of nowhere. It was like a little village put together with a canteen tent, big sleeping tents that you share with another, so 2 people per tent, and then a yurt as well. So it was, compared to doing the national trail on my own, it was, you have full backup. It was awesome and really well organized.
I thought I read somewhere there were hot showers. Is that true?
No, that's not true. If the water bladder had been sitting in the sun, you might have a warmish shower, but no, it's not true otherwise.
What did you find to be the most challenging part of the race?
The physical aspect of it. So you 8 to 10 hours a day riding at a trot or a canter, so you're in suspension in your stirrups. I got tendinitis in both my ankles. I was in excruciating pain in terms of muscle soreness at the end of the day. And I still had Ross River fever, the tropical fever I got from the trail. So I was battling with that, and I took a lot of supplements to get through, and a lot of anti-inflammatories and painkillers, and just tried to ignore the pain, but it's physically extremely demanding.
What was your favorite part of the race?
I met some wonderful people, the other teams, especially the Australians and New Zealand one, or even, actually they were all nice. The American couple was super lovely as well. Met some extremely lovely people. Going back to Mongolia was great because it had been 10 years since I had done my other horse treks through Mongolia. And yeah, doing an endurance race, I really had fun doing it. After walking along the trail, having some pace all day long, trotting, cantering was heaps of fun.
Do you have any other adventure travels on the horizon?
Not really at this stage. Like I said, the trail was, the longest, and it's taken a lot to do it. And, financially, mentally, physically, all that stuff, it's taken a lot. So I'm a little bit, happy to have a rest for a bit. I haven't had a home for 5 years between working on remote Aboriginal communities and planning this trek. So I'm looking forward to just having my stuff in one place for a little bit longer than a few days. But I know for sure this will, I'll get itchy feet soon enough again. But at this stage, no plans. And like I said before, I consider life to be one big fun adventure. So things will pop up and I'll go to them at that time.
Alienor, how can people contact you if they want to learn more, and also to learn when this book will be released?
Sure. So my Facebook page, Wild at Heart Australia, is the best way. I'll be putting posts and updates on there about when the book is coming out. Yeah, so Facebook's the best way, Wild at Heart Australia. But I also have an Instagram page for those who don't have Facebook. It's the same. It's Wild at Heart Australia on Instagram.
All right. Alienor Gouvello, thank you so much for coming on the show, and congratulations on your accomplishment, both on the trail and the first place finish at the Gobi Desert Cup race.
Thank you very much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you want to support the show, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, and you can like the show on Facebook or follow along on Twitter at The Pursuit Zone. This show was recorded on January 19th, 2018. And for the show notes and for more great adventure podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.